Sprint qualifying is in the books and all signs point to a Hamilton versus Antonelli showdown. In this video, I'll pick the best 2x boost, make the final call on Ferrari versus Red Bull, and show you the lineups I'd be locking in for the British Grand Prix. Let's get to work. Starting first with FP1, we got our first look at the potential running order for the weekend. Ferrari topped the session with Lewis Hamilton, and this is all after Hamilton warned us that Ferrari's straight-line deficit could be worse at Silverstone. But instead, Ferrari looked like they're right in the fight. It was an encouraging start for both Hamilton and Leclerc, but it was Red Bull that actually had a difficult session in this one. Verstappen was nearly a second down in P6, and Isack Hadjar came in down in P8. One team that flew under the radar for all the wrong reasons was Alpine. Gasly and Colapinto have been some of our top fantasy picks all season, but they barely completed any qualifying sims. Gasly finished down with the Aston Martins, so that tells me something wasn't quite right with Alpine's Friday program. Then on to sprint qualifying, we had the usual suspects eliminated in SQ1, and poor Williams. They can't get both cars out of the first part of qualifying, so we're still waiting for that next big upgrade. In SQ2, Lando Norris had some bodywork damage and he was dangling on the edge of elimination, but he made it through to the top 10, so it was Carlos Sainz, both Audis, and 2 Alpines out of SQ2. At this point, there were no big surprises, but SQ3 had us all on the edge of our seats. Everyone waited till the very end for their flying lap, and it was Lewis Hamilton on sprint pole, and he had a monster lap. Even losing a bit of time in Sector 3, he finished ahead of Kimi Antonelli, who's starting up alongside him in P2. Verstappen followed in P3, so Red Bull are still in the fight for this one, followed by Russell and the 2 McLarens. So with Friday behind us, let's settle some of the biggest lineup questions once and for all. First up, the big one. Who is the top 2x boost option this weekend? Is it championship leader Kimi Antonelli or 9-time winner around this circuit Lewis Hamilton? I didn't believe it after Lewis took FP1. And I almost didn't believe it after he took sprint pole. But the betting lines are in, and it's official. Lewis Hamilton's done enough to make this a real 2-car battle on Sunday. So if you have that extra transfer for Lewis and you want a differential, I'd do it. He has a lower target to gain 0.3 million, and he's the most likely driver to win the Driver of the Day award. Can't believe I'm saying this, but give me Lewis. Next, on to the biggest decision of Tier B. Isack Hadjar or Pierre Gasly. Hadjar's finished P6 or better in 4 straight races and needs just 9 points for another 0.6 million price rise. So he's been our preferred option all week. But did Friday change that? Not for me. If anything, it really reinforced my pick of Isack for this weekend. Hadjar looks capable of another top 6 finish, while Alpine just haven't looked right. They've been trending in the wrong direction since Barcelona, and nothing we saw on Friday gives me confidence that that's going to change this weekend. Finally, the biggest constructor decision of the weekend is Ferrari or Red Bull. We came into Silverstone expecting Ferrari's straight-line weakness to be exposed. Plus, Max and Red Bull showed some really big improvements in Austria, but Friday made a believer out of me for the Scuderia. P1 and P4 in sprint qualifying, so they seemed completely fine to me. I'd keep that extra 4.3 million that you would have needed on Red Bull and spread it out amongst your drivers, or bank it and hedge for a final fix if Red Bull make a comeback on Saturday. If you're enjoying these final thoughts, make sure you like the video because it really helps the channel. And if you still have lineup questions, join us live before the deadline. Terry's Team 3 is up to 80th in the world, and returning to the fantasy formula is Tom Pullinger, better known as Pop Pan Man, and his team is 144th in the Global League. They're both going to have some huge decisions to make, and we're going to break them down live before the sprint race. Let's dive into some questions that you asked on our Silverstone preview episode, and they're both about chips. The first one comes from Lycrax, who says, I'm new to F1 Fantasy. Should I consider Limitless with an Austria lineup of Hamilton, Hadjar, Bortoleto, Hulkenberg, Lindblad, Mercedes, and Ferrari with a 110.6 million budget? Absolutely. I think this is one of the best weeks all season that you're going to have to use Limitless. You've already got Hamilton, who's the most likely Tier A driver to gain value, 3 of the top 4 Tier B price gainers, plus we have a good sense of the top 5 drivers this weekend. So I like having a stable Limitless team based on what we've seen on Friday. And also, when you look at this circuit, Silverstone's ranked below the median for overtakes each of the last 3 seasons. So that's going to create a bigger gap between Limitless teams and regular teams. I'd go so far as to say this is the last great opportunity to play Limitless in 2026, so I'd use it. The next question comes from Reese Pockney 1900, who asks, thoughts on using my 3 transfers to get Mercedes, Racing Bulls, Antonelli, Hamilton, Hadjar, Lindblad, Hulkenberg, and playing the 3x boost? Now, this might not be a popular answer, but I'd hold on to the chip. The last post FP1 sims from F1 Fantasy Tools project that lineup at around 290 points, while the best non chip team in that same budget range is still projected for about 250. And a 40-point edge just isn't enough for me. And the biggest reason for that is Ferrari. If you're trusting Hamilton in your lineup, you're also trusting the Ferrari constructor, but you're leaving them out of your lineup. They're projected to outscore Racing Bulls right now by more than 50 points, and that wipes out a lot of the advantage that extra DRS gives you. It's definitely a gamble, but I'd rather save the chip for Zandvoort or Singapore, where you can maybe get into a 4A lineup, and that gives you a better chance of creating a meaningful gap over the rest of the teams because you won't be locked into a Tier B constructor. Now, we should get one more round of simulations before lineups lock, especially in light of Hamilton's sprint pole. But unless that projected advantage climbs up to 75 points or 80 points, I'd be holding extra DRS for one of the last 2 sprint weekends of the year. Here are the final tier list rankings for the British Grand Prix. Starting in Tier A, I didn't see enough out of McLaren to convince me they can repeat as winners here at Silverstone, so they fall into the sell category. I'm not convinced enough to start the weekend with Max, but no team in Formula One is better than Red Bull at finding performance overnight. So he's the top final fix candidate for Sunday, so you might want to keep a little bit of budget left over. Over in Tier B, those drivers are in my rank order. Hadjar, Lindblad, Lawson, and Bortoletto are all strong buys. Hulkenberg has his only F1 podium here and can't lose value, so he's next. And then Franco Colapinto is sort of a buy, but he's a pretty distant 6th to the rest of those other drivers. Even if you can't afford Hadjar, I'd just roll with an Audi and bank the extra budget for a final fix upgrade if you need it on Sunday. Gasly and Alpine haven't looked right at all on Friday, so Racing Bulls stand alone as the top Tier B constructor. Let's bring it all together with the lineups I'd be locking in for the Silverstone sprint this weekend. The first lineup is my plan A for the weekend. 1 transfer to bring in Hadjar for Gasly, carry an unused transfer to Belgium, and trust that Ferrari's Friday is the real deal. 4 top budget builders means I have my eyes on a 4A lineup. Now, if you have a similar budget but think Red Bull can turn it around for the Grand Prix on Sunday, you can bring Lawson down to Nico Hulkenberg, and that should free up enough budget for Verstappen or George Russell. But you might just need the final fix for Lewis Hamilton, so let's look at a Lewis team, because I think this one's actually going to be the most popular lineup. P1 and FP1, sprint pole, the most wins in podiums at a single circuit ever, and he's 0.9 million cheaper. So very similar core to the last lineup, but starting the week with Lewis. And I could easily be convinced to pivot from plan A to an anti-Nelly team like what you see here. And finally, if you're playing Limitless, this is the team I'd be locking in. Triple Mercedes, triple Ferrari, and Max Verstappen. I'm out on McLaren after what we saw on Friday, so we're counting on a bounce-back performance from Charles Leclerc as the 5th driver. I've got the 2x boost on Lewis Hamilton, but you can make a strong case for Kimi Antonelli, his teammate George Russell, or even Max Verstappen. We'll be back at 6 a.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. in the UK to answer all of your questions with me, Pop Pan Man, and Terry. Thanks so much for watching.